Hello, I'm Samuel, 42 years old, a civil engineer by profession, and I live in a quiet rural nook of Michigan. Here the gravel roads transform into golden rivers every autumn, blanketed by fallen leaves, and the breeze often carries a soft pine aroma from the woods nearby. Our family home is a modest but welcoming two-story structure, nestled between whispering trees, with 3 cozy bedrooms and a lush garden that flourishes in spring. It was a generous wedding gift from my wife's family when Laura and I got married 15 years ago. It's not a grand estate or anything fancy, but the crisp white walls, glistening hardwood floors, and the warm kitchen, complete with a dining table that comfortably seats all of us, once gave me the impression that we had found our forever sanctuary. It felt like the kind of place where memories were made, where holidays would be filled with laughter, and the smell of pies baking would drift through the halls. Yet, within all that comfort, there are silent voids, cracks in our little world that I can't seem to repair. For many years it was just the 3 of us, me, Laura, and our daughter Tracy, a bright and thoughtful 7th grader. But in recent months our family grew by one more, my mother, Vanessa. My mother is currently facing an unrelenting heart condition, one that's slowly diminishing her strength with each passing day. My father passed away 4 years ago, the result of a sudden, devastating stroke. I still hear my mother's trembling voice on the phone that day. "Samuel, your father? He's gone." I had dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, but all I found was the stillness of his body, already surrendered to the quiet. Since his passing, my mother has lived alone in their old suburban house, about a 30-minute drive from our home. I made frequent visits, often bringing her meals, or sitting beside her with a cup of coffee while she reminisced about the past. She'd talk about her youth with my father, their weekend cookie baking sessions in that little kitchen, filled with the buttery aroma of sweet dough and melted chocolate chips. But recently, everything changed. Her health declined rapidly. The doctor told us it was heart failure, a cruel condition where each heartbeat feels like an uphill battle. I couldn't bear the thought of her enduring that struggle alone, so I brought her into our home, convinced I was doing the right thing. I wanted to provide her with warmth, love, and dignity in her final chapter. In my mind, I had painted an idyllic picture, Mom, sitting by the window, softly narrating tales of fishing trips with Dad, to Tracy, Laura humming in the kitchen as she brewed her favorite mint tea. The 3 of us gathered around a table, brimming with the aroma of home-cooked food. I imagined myself coming home from work to this comforting scene, the house alive with affection and peace. But reality didn't match the vision. Laura, my wife, has always been particular, structured. Still, I didn't anticipate the resentment that bubbled up after my mother moved in. She never yelled or openly objected, but her eyes said it all, icy and sharp, betraying her true feelings. One evening, as I was clearing the dinner table, she muttered, "Your mom's messing everything up." My mother was just a few feet away, gazing out the window with tired eyes. I don't know if she heard it, but I feared she had. I turned to Laura, trying to sound gentle but firm. "Honey, she's not well. This is temporary. Please, let's try to make it work." Laura offered a thin, mocking smile and left the room in silence, her footsteps echoing like judgment. And things only spiraled from there. Laura's patience wore thin. Her remarks became passive-aggressive, laced with irritation. One morning, my mother accidentally spilled water on the kitchen floor. Laura, arms crossed tightly, scoffed. "Great, more mess for me, thanks a lot." My mother immediately bent down, her frail hands trembling as she wiped the floor with a paper napkin, mumbling apologies under her breath. I knelt beside her, my hand gently resting on her shoulder. "It's okay, Mom, I'll clean it up." But her eyes, those sorrowful eyes, haunted me. They brimmed with guilt, with a sense of burden she never should have had to carry. Later that evening I took Laura aside, my tone quiet but pleading. "She didn't do it on purpose. Please, stop making her feel unwelcome." Laura's response cut deeper than I expected. "What, am I the maid now? I have a life, Samuel, a real one." And with that she walked away again, leaving me standing in the hallway, the silence colder than winter air. In those dim days, the only source of joy in the house was Tracy. At 13, she's lanky, with wild brown hair and a heart more generous than anyone I've ever known. She adores her grandmother, often curling up beside her to hear stories from the past, of dancing in the rain with Grandpa, or singing folk tunes by the fireplace. One afternoon I saw Tracy scribbling down a cookie recipe in a tiny notebook, her face alight with enthusiasm. "I'll bake these for you, Grandma," she announced proudly. My mother's hand gently brushed Tracy's hair. She smiled, a soft, weary smile. "Thank you, sweetheart." But I could see the weight behind that smile. She knew every moment with Tracy was fleeting, a gift wrapped in time. Even Tracy couldn't escape the growing tension. One day, I returned from work to hear Laura's raised voice. "Tracy, can't you see she's making a mess again? Go clean up that pile of books." I walked into the living room and found Tracy frozen in place, clutching an armful of my mother's old books, her eyes shimmering with unspilled tears. My mother sat quietly in her chair, head bowed in silent shame. "Laura, that's enough," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Stop blaming her for everything." Laura met my gaze, her expression defiant. "Oh, so now I'm the villain? You always take her side." Caught in the silence that followed, Tracy quietly turned and took the books to her room. That night, after Laura had gone to bed, I sat with my mother, ensuring she'd taken her medication. I asked her how she felt, if her chest still hurt, and if her breathing had eased. She looked at me with gentle eyes and squeezed my hand. "Don't worry about me, Samuel. Just being here, with you and Tracy, makes me feel like I'm home." After she went to bed, the house would fall into a hush, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards or the wind brushing against the windows. In those moments, I'd sit beside my mother, sometimes in silence, sometimes holding her hand as she stared at the stars. She would whisper stories about my childhood I barely remembered, how I used to build imaginary bridges with toy blocks, or how I once brought home a stray puppy and begged to keep it. Her voice, though weak, still carried warmth. Tracy would often sneak in with her blanket and curl up beside her grandmother, asking for another tale, even if she'd already heard it a dozen times. I watched them together, realizing that these quiet, tender interactions were the very essence of family, the things that truly mattered. But Laura couldn't see it. Her resentment simmered, unspoken yet omnipresent. The clinking of plates in the sink, the heavy sighs, the closed doors, all signs of a growing chasm. At times I questioned myself. Had I asked too much of her? Was it wrong to expect her to share our home, our life, with my ailing mother? Yet when I looked into Mother's weary eyes or felt Tracy's small hands in mine, I knew I couldn't have done otherwise. But I knew she wasn't fine. Her dry, hacking coughs, the moments she stopped to catch her breath just walking from the living room to the kitchen, each one was a grim reminder that time was slipping away. I only wanted her remaining days to be calm and filled with love, but Laura, she didn't understand. Or maybe she didn't want to. One evening I was crouched by the lamp in the living room adjusting some loose wiring. Laura walked in, scrolling through her phone, her voice laced with envy and longing. "My cousin just posted more pictures from Florida," she said dreamily. "They're staying in a massive villa, poolside cocktails, beach parties every night." Then, as if snapping back to reality, she added with a bitter twist, "Meanwhile, I'm stuck in this cramped house with your mom." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her, trying hard to suppress the frustration that swelled in my chest. "Laura, Mom's not a burden," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "She's part of this family. Doesn't that matter to you?" She let out a cold, dismissive laugh. "Family? You really think I signed up to care for a sick, old woman? I have my own life, Samuel." I said nothing. I just watched her, trying to find the woman I had once stood beside at the altar, the woman who had sworn to weather life's storms with me. But all I saw now was detachment, selfishness so bare it cut into me like a blade. I turned back to the lamp, but inside everything was churning. I knew if something didn't change, we were heading for disaster. Still, I wasn't ready to face it, not yet. The tension only thickened. It hung over us like a thundercloud waiting to burst. Laura stopped making any effort to be polite. She no longer masked her disdain, ignoring my mother when spoken to, or replying with clipped, impatient words. One morning, when my mother asked for help retrieving a medicine box from a high shelf, Laura didn't even glance up from her phone. "In a minute," she said lazily, continuing to scroll. Tracy, who had been quietly watching, stepped in without a word. She fetched the box and handed it to her grandmother, her eyes burning with quiet anger. I wanted to yell, to confront Laura, to scream that she was treating my mother like an unwanted guest. But fear held me back. I was terrified that one fierce argument might destroy what little peace we still had. My mother, though her body weakened more each day, tried so hard to fit in. One afternoon she brought out an old wooden box. Inside were yellowed photographs, tiny keepsakes, and a notebook filled with faded, elegant handwriting, her recipes. She called Tracy and me into her room, placed the box gently on the bed, and began to open the chapters of our family's history. There was a photograph of me as a toddler, stumbling through a grassy yard. Another of my father and me holding fishing rods, smiling like we owned the world. Then one of us, flour-covered and laughing, in the kitchen. Tracy soaked in every story, her eyes wide and cheeks glowing. But in my mother's eyes, I saw something else. A shadow. A quiet sorrow, as though she knew these were her last chances to share these memories. I squeezed her hand and said, "Mom, let's bake this weekend. All of us, like old times." She nodded, a small smile on her face, but I knew she didn't believe it. Because Laura wouldn't join. She never did. Later that week, as I sat reviewing blueprints at the kitchen table, Laura walked in with a sweet tone she rarely used anymore. "Samuel, my mom invited us for dinner this Sunday. You think you can come?" Surprised by the civility, I replied, "Sure, sounds nice. Can Mom come along?" Laura froze, just for a moment. The smile faded slightly. "No, your mom should stay home. She's not well, remember? Why tire her out?" I wanted to argue, to demand fairness, but she was already walking away, leaving a silence in her wake that spoke volumes. It was then I realized Laura didn't just dislike my mother's presence. She wanted her gone. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. From the adjacent room I heard my mother's faint coughs. I thought of my father, how he once held my mother's hand like she was the most fragile, precious thing in the world. I remembered how they built a life grounded in sacrifice and tenderness, and I thought of Laura, of how we had once been so in sync, so full of hope. Had something changed in her over the years, or had I simply failed to see it before? I also thought of Tracy, of her compassion, of the fierce loyalty in her eyes when she stood up for her grandmother. I knew then I had to act, but I didn't yet know how. Something had to give. The air in our home was thick with silence and suppressed emotion. Something was going to ignite it. Soon. And it did. A week later, I was called to a job site in Ohio, over 300 miles from home. It was a major contract, construction on a commercial complex we'd been courting for over a year. Turning it down could mean missing a long-awaited promotion. Under normal circumstances, I might have been excited. But now, all I could think about was my mother. Her chest pains had become more frequent. She often had to sit down, clutching her chest, struggling for breath. I hated the idea of leaving her, but the bills were mounting. Her medications, Tracy's school fees, and Laura's endless financial demands. I didn't have the luxury of saying no. The night before I left, I sat at the dining table, trying to talk things over with Laura. The room, bathed in the soft glow of our antique lamp, should have felt like home. But it didn't. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm. I no longer knew how to calm down. Laura sat across from me, flipping through a magazine without really reading it. I cleared my throat. "I'll be gone for 5 days. Maybe 6 if delays come up. Can you manage things here while I'm away?" She didn't look up. "Sure. We'll survive. I mean, with Mom. Her meds. Her checkups." "I know what to do," she cut in, her tone flat. I hesitated. "She's really not doing well, Laura. Just, please, be kind." She finally met my gaze, and for a flicker of a second, something softer passed over her face. Maybe guilt, maybe tiredness. "I'll do what I can," she said simply, before returning to her magazine. It wasn't much of a promise, but it was all I had. That night I tucked Tracy into bed. She looked up at me, her expression worried. "Dad, what if something happens to Grandma while you're gone?" I smoothed her hair. "You're here with her. Just sit with her. Talk to her like you always do. That helps her more than you know." She nodded, but her eyes glistened. "Okay." Before going to bed myself, I checked on my mother. She was resting, but not sleeping. Her eyes opened when I walked in. "You're leaving early?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Yeah, tomorrow, before sunrise. I wanted to say goodbye first." She patted the edge of her bed. I sat beside her. "Be safe," she said. "Don't worry about me too much." I took her hand in both of mine. "I'll call every day. Tracy will be with you, and Laura." She smiled faintly. "I know." And for the first time in weeks, I saw peace in her eyes. But it made me uneasy. That kind of peace sometimes feels like a goodbye. But that evening, it only felt stifling. Tracy had gone to bed, and my mother was resting in the living room, where the old armchair had become her main refuge. I looked at Laura, searching for some reassurance in her eyes, but she was engrossed in her phone, her fingers scrolling quickly through pictures of beaches and villas from her cousins in Florida. "Laura," I began, my voice gentle but cautious. "I'll be gone for 5 days. Please take good care of Mom while I'm away, okay? Her medications are on the kitchen shelf, and I've posted the schedule for when she needs to take them. If anything seems off, call Dr. Harris right away. His number's in the notebook." I paused, hoping for something more than silence. Laura looked up, her eyes indifferent. "Yeah, okay," she said with a shrug, as if I'd just asked her to take out the trash. "I know what to do." Her apathy made my heart clench. I wanted to remind her that my mother wasn't a chore, she was family, my own mother. But I was afraid that saying more would trigger another argument. "Thank you," I muttered, though my voice carried no gratitude. The next morning, before dawn had stretched across the sky, I got up. The garden outside was still wet with dew, and a thin fog floated among the trees. I found my mother awake in the living room, cradling a familiar book with weathered corners, one she had read countless times. "I'm heading out, Mom," I said, bending to kiss her forehead. She smiled faintly. "Be careful, Samuel." "I'm fine, don't worry," I replied, but her expression told me she wasn't convinced. As I left the house, that sense of unease returned. I looked back and saw Laura in the kitchen doorway, holding her coffee mug with a blank stare. "Take good care of Mom, Laura," I said again, my voice nearly pleading. She nodded but said nothing. The trip began with relentless days, back-to-back meetings, early mornings on construction sites, late nights solving unexpected issues, but I was never fully present. My thoughts were hundreds of miles away. I called home gaily, always speaking to Tracy. She gave cheerful updates. "Grandma's fine, Dad. We made cookies today, but we burnt one batch." Her laugh was light, and I tried to laugh along, but deep down, I knew she was putting on a brave face. I didn't call Laura. I couldn't. I didn't want her indifference to weigh heavier on me than it already did. On the fourth day, while grabbing lunch at a small roadside diner, my phone rang. Tracy's name lit up the screen. She never called during the day. My pulse quickened. "Tracy, what's wrong?" Her voice trembled on the other end. "Dad, Grandma, she had a heart attack. I called an ambulance. They took her to the hospital. Can you come home now?" My heart stopped. "I'm coming, sweetheart. Where are you? Where's Mom?" Tracy sobbed. "Mom's not home, Dad. She went somewhere. She left a note, told me to look after Grandma." The word slammed into me. I stood up so quickly that I knocked over my glass of water. A note? Where had Laura gone? I called her immediately. Voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. I called the hospital next. They confirmed my mother was there under emergency care. "She's being monitored, but her condition is unstable," the nurse told me. "Are you family? You should come immediately." I abandoned the rest of my meetings, ignored my colleagues' protests, got in my car and drove. 5 long hours across highways that blurred through anxious tears. The silence in the car was louder than any noise. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Laura, my wife, the woman I trusted to care for my mother, had left. Without a word, just a note. What kind of note? A goodbye? An excuse? I didn't know, and the not knowing gnawed at me like a wild animal. When I finally reached the hospital, night had already fallen. The parking lot was dim, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine. I ran through the doors, heart pounding like a drum. In the ER hallway, I found Tracy curled up on a chair. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy. She looked so small, so fragile. "Dad," she cried, rushing into my arms. "I was so scared." "Grandma?" She was holding her chest and then just collapsed. I didn't know what to do. I hugged her tightly. "You did everything right, sweetheart. I'm here now. It's okay." But nothing felt okay. Dr. Harris, our long-trusted physician, soon came out. His face was drawn, his mouth tight. "Samuel, your mother suffered a severe heart attack. We've managed to stabilize her for now, but she's in critical condition. Her heart is very weak. We'll keep monitoring her closely, but it's not promising." I nodded, the weight of his words crushing me from within. "Can I see her?" He nodded solemnly and led me inside. My mother lay there, dwarfed by the hospital bed, thin and still, her body surrounded by wires and softly beeping monitors. I approached slowly, my footsteps like echoes in the sterile room. I reached out and took her hand, cold, frail, barely gripping back. "Mom, it's me," I whispered, leaning closer. "I'm here. I won't leave you alone." Her fingers moved slightly, as if to acknowledge my presence. I sat down beside her, gently stroking the back of her hand, listening to the soft hum of the machines that seemed to echo the fragile rhythm of her heart. The room felt cold, despite the layers of blankets that covered her. Or maybe it was just me, chilled by fear, by guilt, by helplessness. I thought of how she used to hum lullabies to me when I had nightmares, of how her hands once kneaded dough and rolled out cookies while I watched in awe as a child. Now those same hands were limp, the life in them flickering like a candle on its last wick. Tracy stood by the door, hesitant. I looked at her and nodded gently. She approached the bed slowly and whispered, "Hi, Grandma. It's me. I'm here." She reached out and placed a small, crumpled drawing she'd made earlier, a picture of the three of us in front of our house, on the nightstand. I felt tears sting my eyes. In that drawing, we were all smiling. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at the world, at Lara, at fate. I wanted to ask why the people who deserve love the most are often the ones who suffer in silence. But I couldn't. All I could do was sit there and hold my mother's hand, as if my presence could somehow shield her from the edge she was standing on. Eventually, Dr. Harris returned. "She's stable for now," he said. "You should stay the night. Just in case." I nodded. "We will." The hospital gave us 2 stiff chairs and a thin blanket. Tracy curled up next to me, her head resting on my shoulder. I didn't sleep. I watched the rise and fall of my mother's chest, praying with each breath that it wouldn't be the last. In the early hours of the morning, I finally reached for my phone and reread Tracy's text, the one with the picture of the note Laura had left. It was a single sentence scrawled hastily. "I need some space. Don't call." That was it. 12 words, no apology, no explanation, just distance. And yet, even as I sat there in that cold, sterile room, part of me wasn't surprised. She opened her eyes slightly, giving a weak smile. "Samuel, where's Tracy?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "She's fine, Mom. She's outside. Rest now. I'll stay with you." When I returned to the hallway, Tracy handed me an envelope, her hands trembling. "This is what Mom left Dad," she said. I opened the note, and Laura's words cut into my heart like a knife. "Samuel, I need some time to relax. I'm going to Florida with my mom and cousins. Tracy's old enough to take care of your mother. Don't call. I'll be back in a few days." No apology, no concern, no hint of compassion. Just blunt, cold indifference. As if my mother, as if Tracy, were nothing more than disruptions to her carefully curated life. I crumpled the note in my hand, rage welling inside me like a storm. Laura hadn't just abandoned my mother, she had abandoned Tracy, our 13-year-old daughter, leaving her alone to face a crisis that no child should bear. My hand shook with fury, but I didn't call her. I knew I would scream. I knew that nothing she could say would ever make this right. Nothing would erase the betrayal. Tracy looked up at me, her brown eyes swollen and shimmering with fear and something deeper, something that resembled strength. She bit her lip as if holding back her emotions, then finally spoke in a soft, trembling voice. "Dad, Mom's been really mean to Grandma," she said. Each word landed like a blow to the chest. "She's always annoyed, always saying bad things. The night you left for your trip, during dinner, Grandma dropped some rice. Her hands were shaking. And Mom just snapped. She shouted at her, 'Who can stand eating like that?' Grandma just looked down. I saw her eyes get red. She didn't say anything." Tracy paused, wiping tears that now streamed freely down her cheeks. "I told Mom Grandma needed to take her medicine on time, but she got mad and said let her handle it herself. I'm not her maid." I stood there, stunned. The floor beneath me felt like it was crumbling. The image of my mother, frail and gentle, being humiliated and dismissed in her own son's home, shattered something inside me. I looked at Tracy. Small, but strong. She had witnessed all of it. And she had tried to protect her grandmother the only way she knew how. "I tried, Dad," Tracy whispered. "I gave her the medicine, I sat with her, but she's so sad. She told me she doesn't want to be a burden." The word hit me hard. Burden. My mother, who once held my hand and guided my first steps, who packed my lunch every day and kissed my forehead before I slept, who gave up so much of her life for me, now felt like a burden. I pulled Tracy into my arms. She trembled in my embrace. "You did amazing, Tracy," I said, my voice hoarse. "You're so brave. I'm proud of you." But my heart was burning, not with sadness, with anger. Laura had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She didn't deserve Tracy's love. She didn't deserve the years I had given her. She had failed us in the worst way imaginable. That night, I sat by my mother's bedside, holding her hand, listening to the monitors beep steadily in the quiet room. Tracy had curled up in a chair again, asleep from exhaustion. I looked down at the crumpled note in my hand, feeling like a piece of me had broken. I thought of all the times I tried to make our marriage work. All the times I let Laura's selfishness slide, choosing peace over confrontation. But now I saw it for what it was: cowardice. I had let things fester, and now my mother had suffered for it. So had Tracy. The hours passed slowly, like a nightmare stretching without end. My mother stirred only briefly, barely able to whisper a word before sleep claimed her again. Dr. Harris returned later, his expression grim. "Samuel," he said gently, "we're doing everything we can, but your mother's heart is very weak. You need to prepare yourself." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to accept it. Not yet. She couldn't leave me. Not her. Not now. Around midnight, Tracy woke and sat beside me. "Will Grandma be okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stroked her hair, forcing a smile. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise. We'll do everything we can." She didn't say anything more. She just took my hand, and we sat there in the quiet glow of the hospital lights, waiting for a miracle. The next morning, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I needed to speak to Laura. Even if her words changed nothing, I needed to hear them. I stepped into the hallway, away from the curious eyes of the nurses, and opened FaceTime. My thumb hovered over the screen as the call connected. The familiar ringing tone buzzed in my ear, like an alarm I couldn't silence. When her face appeared, framed by sunlight and swaying palm trees in the background, I felt something inside me harden. She looked surprised to see me, as if the situation didn't warrant urgency. "Samuel," she said, tilting her head, "is everything okay?" I clenched my jaw, trying to control the fire in my chest. "No, Laura, nothing is okay." She blinked, as if confused, then sighed and shifted the camera. "Look, I just needed a break. Your mom... It's been exhausting. And I thought, Tracy..." "Gracie is a child," I interrupted, my voice low but fierce. "She's 13, and you left her to deal with a heart attack." Laura frowned, annoyed. "You're overreacting." I stared at the screen, stunned by her audacity. "Overreacting? Do you even hear yourself? My mother nearly died. Tracy had to call the ambulance, alone, while you were sipping cocktails on a beach." Her silence spoke louder than any excuse. I shook my head. "You didn't just walk out on my mom. You walked out on your daughter." Laura looked away, her expression unreadable. "I needed time. That house. It was suffocating me." "And what about Tracy?" I snapped. "Was she not suffocating too? Watching you humiliate her grandmother? Feeling helpless?" "I didn't sign up to be a nurse, Samuel," she muttered. "No," I said coldly. "You signed up to be a wife, a mother, a partner, and you failed every single one of those roles." The screen went quiet. Laura didn't respond. I ended the call. My hand trembled as I put the phone down. I stood there in the hallway, my breathing heavy, my mind buzzing. I had never felt so clear. There would be no going back. Not after this. I returned to the room where Tracy was feeding my mother small sips of water, her young face etched with care and exhaustion. In that moment, I saw more love and strength in her than I'd ever seen in Laura. And I knew I had to protect this. Whatever came next, I would face it. For my mother, for Tracy, for the kind of family we deserved. The phone rang for a long time before Laura finally answered. Her face popped onto the screen, lounging by a glistening pool with the bright Florida sun bouncing off her perfectly styled blonde hair. She wore a loud floral sundress and held a colorful cocktail in one hand. The smile on her face didn't feel like warmth. It felt like a slap across mine. "Samuel, why are you calling so urgently?" she asked, her voice casual, touched with condescension. "I'm busy relaxing here." "Relaxing?" I echoed, barely able to contain the tremor of rage in my voice. "Laura, my mother is in the hospital. She nearly died from a heart attack. Tracy had to call an ambulance alone. Terrified. And you? You're off on vacation like none of this matters." Her brow arched slightly, not with concern but with smugness. "Oh, come on, don't blow things out of proportion. Tracy's old enough to handle stuff. And your mother? She's always exaggerating, you know that. She's just a burden." That word, burden, cut like a knife. Lara went on, unbothered. "I needed time for myself. I deserve this. I'm with my family, having fun for once." She took a slow sip of her drink, as if we were discussing weekend plans and not the fallout of her abandonment. I could feel my blood boil. "A burden?" I hissed. "My mother is fighting to stay alive. You yelled at her for dropping rice. You ignored her when she needed help taking her medication. And don't even try to deny it. You took money from our joint account to pay for this whole trip, didn't you? Laura gave a slow, icy smile. You found out about that, huh? Yeah, I took it. It's our money, Samuel. I'm entitled to use it, and honestly, if your mother weren't living with us, things would be a lot easier. What are you going to do? Divorce me? You don't have the guts. I took a deep breath, not to calm myself but to steady my decision. You're wrong, I said, my voice clear. I do have the guts. When you get back, we're talking to a lawyer. You're not my wife anymore, and you're not the kind of mother Tracy deserves. I turned in the call before she could respond, my heart thundering. But it wasn't fear that gripped me, it was liberation. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. This marriage had been rotting quietly for too long. Now there was no more pretending. When I returned to the hospital room, my mother was awake. Her face looked pale, but her eyes were a little brighter. Tracy sat beside her, holding her hand, telling her about a stray cat she'd seen at school. My mother smiled, a thin, gentle curve of her lips. Samuel, she called softly, come here. I need to tell you something. I pulled my chair closer and took her hand, her fingers cool but still strong enough to squeeze mine. Son, she said, her eyes tender but resolute, I know I don't have much time left. I tried to stop her, but she lifted her other hand weakly, asking me to let her finish. Listen to me. I bought a life insurance policy years ago, back when your father was still alive. When I go, you'll receive about $1 million. It's in the suitcase with my clothes. I just want you and Tracy to have a secure future, to not worry about money. I sat in stunned silence. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? I didn't want you to think I was giving up, she said softly. I just wanted you to know that no matter what happens, I've always been thinking of you and Tracy. Tracy's eyes welled up with tears. Grandma, don't say that. You have to get better. You have to make cookies with me again. My mother stroked Tracy's hair, her touch slow, full of love. I'll try, sweetheart, but if I can't, you have to promise me something. Tracy nodded, her tears spilling freely now. You take care of your dad, okay? The next few days became a gentle routine of love and memories. I read aloud from her favorite old novel, adjusted her pillows, and tried cooking the simple meals she used to make for us. Tracy was always there too, her little notebook in hand, reading cookie recipes or making up silly stories to make Grandma smile. Those hours, however brief and fleeting, became a refuge. The pain Laura caused faded in those moments, eclipsed by the presence of the two people who mattered most. One afternoon, while Tracy had gone to buy water from the vending machine, my mother pulled me close. Samuel, she whispered, be strong. Not for me, for Tracy. She needs you, and you need to live for yourself now, not for Laura. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I know, Mom. I promise. She smiled, a real smile this time, and for a heartbeat I saw peace in her eyes. But that peace didn't last. That night, everything changed. The monitor beside her bed began to beep erratically. Nurses rushed into the room. I stood frozen, clutching Tracy's hand, as we watched them try to stabilize her. But deep in my heart, I knew she was ready to go. Dr. Harris emerged some time later, his expression grave. Samuel, I'm so sorry, he said. We did everything we could. She passed peacefully, with you and Tracy by her side. I turned to Tracy, who was sobbing quietly in my arms, and held her close. And in that moment, part of my heart went with my mother. The hospital room grew quiet, too quiet. The hum of machines and soft shuffle of nurses outside the door faded as my focus narrowed to the woman lying still on the hospital bed, my mother, my anchor, the person who had held our family together with unwavering love. Tracy clung to me, her face buried in my chest. Her small hands clenched the fabric of my shirt, and though she didn't say a word, her shaking body said it all. I gently stroked her back, whispering, It's okay, she's not in pain anymore. But it wasn't okay, not yet, maybe not for a long time. After a while, Tracy looked up at me, her eyes swollen, her cheeks blotched with tears. Dad, what do we do now? We remember her, I said. We keep her alive in everything we do. We honor her. We stayed in the hospital for hours, reluctant to leave her side. I helped the nurses gather her belongings. The suitcase she had brought when she moved in with us felt heavier than ever. I carried it like it contained something sacred. Later that evening, we returned home. Our house felt colder, emptier. Even the walls seemed to know she was gone. Tracy went straight to the kitchen and opened the recipe notebook, flipping to the page where Grandma's cookie recipe was written. I want to make these, she said, her voice fragile. So we did. In silence, side by side, we followed each step. The dough stuck to our fingers. The first tray was a little too browned, but the smell was hers. Butter, sugar, vanilla. It wrapped around us like a memory come to life. We stood in the kitchen, arms dusted with flour, and cried. And in that moment, I knew. My mother wasn't really gone. Not entirely. She was there, in the warmth of the oven, in the laughter that would someday return, in the strength of the girl beside me. Dreamed in the resolve that finally filled my heart. Laura may have walked out, but I had something far more valuable, a future built on love, and a daughter brave enough to carry it forward. I arranged a simple but dignified funeral for my mother in a small church nestled in a quiet part of Michigan, the same church where she and my father used to attend Sunday services together, hand in hand. Friends and neighbors from her past came to pay their respects, many carrying bouquets and quiet condolences. I recognized faces from old photographs, from community potlucks, from stories my mother used to tell over evening tea, but not a single member of Laura's family showed up. I wasn't surprised. I had stopped expecting decency from them long ago, but their absence that day didn't just sting, it solidified my resolve. I knew, without any lingering doubt, that the chapter with Laura needed to end. Returning home after the funeral, the house that once breathed life, the white walls, the tidy garden, the rooms filled with memories, now felt hollow, as if the soul of the place had left with her. I walked into the living room, where the old armchair still sat by the window. The cushion was slightly indented from the weight of her body, and the blanket she often used was still draped over the side. I sat down, gripping the worn wooden box she had brought with her when she moved in. The box was weathered and scarred by time, a modest container of precious things. I opened it slowly. The faint scent of aged paper and polished wood rose like a whisper from the past. Inside were the pieces of a life fully lived, old black and white photographs, a silver bracelet she used to wear, and a badge from my father's days as a volunteer firefighter. I ran my fingers over the images. I was a child, clutching my parents' hands at a picnic. Tracy, a tiny newborn, nestled in my mother's arms, both their eyes closed in perfect peace. It was as if every item in that box held a piece of her soul, fragments she had left behind for me to hold. I pulled out the recipe notebook, the same one she and Tracy had spent hours poring over. The pages were worn and marked with stains of use. The ink faded, but the handwriting unmistakably hers. My throat tightened as I read her notes in the margins, gentle reminders like, "Add a little more cinnamon for Tracy's favorite." I placed the book down and went into her bedroom. It still smelled faintly of lavender, that delicate scent that followed her wherever she went. I knelt down and retrieved the suitcase from under the bed. As I opened it, her scent overwhelmed me. Soft, familiar, heartbreaking. Inside were her clothes, neatly folded, a green sweater she wore on chilly afternoons, the shawl she wrapped around her shoulders when she read. I pressed the sweater to my face, breathing in the essence of her, as if that scent could somehow rewind time, bring her back to me. Then I saw it, a pale yellow envelope beneath a folded floral handkerchief. My name was written on the front in her delicate, trembling handwriting, for Samuel. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was the life insurance policy she had told me about in the hospital. But it wasn't the policy that stole my breath. It was the short, handwritten note that accompanied it. "Samuel, I'm leaving this for you and Tracy. Use it to live a life where you don't have to fear or depend on anyone. I believe in you. Love, my little boy." Tears blurred the words as I read them over and over. My mother had faced death with clarity, with selflessness. She had planned not only for the end, but for our future. I stayed there on the floor, the sweater in one hand, the letter in the other, crying silently. My mother had never once stopped thinking of us, even when she was suffering, even when she was being mistreated, even when she felt like a burden. Her love lived on, in this letter, in every sacrifice, in every quiet act of strength. I knew then, with crystal clarity, that I had to honor that love. Laura was coming back soon, but this time, she wouldn't find the man who tried to make things work. She would find a father ready to protect his daughter, a son ready to defend his mother's memory. I contacted David Coleman, an old friend of my father's and a trustworthy lawyer. I told him everything, from Laura's verbal abuse to her abandonment, from the financial irresponsibility to the trauma she had inflicted on Tracy. David listened carefully. His tone was calm but decisive. "Samuel, you have enough to file not only for divorce but for full custody. I'll prepare the paperwork, we'll make sure your mother's belongings and her legacy stay protected. I want Tracy with me, I said, and I don't want Laura to take anything from my mother, not even a photo. He nodded. Understood. Laura returned the following Wednesday. Tracy and I were eating dinner, a simple meal of soup and bread. I had made the soup the way my mother used to, with a sprinkle of parsley and a dash of cream. The door clicked open, and in walked Laura, dragging her suitcase behind her. She wore another garish floral dress, sunglasses perched atop her head, and a tan that gleamed like a badge of her selfishness. Her smile was smug. "Hey everyone," she said lightly. "Florida was amazing. You wouldn't believe it." I set my spoon down. Tracy sat beside me, quiet but tense, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her eyes were hard, distant. "Laura," I said, voice even but firm, "sit down, we need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, dropped her suitcase with a dramatic thud, and plopped into a chair across from me. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Samuel. Is your mom okay? Or is she making a big deal out of things again?" And then she smirked. Her words echoed in the room like a cruel joke. I stared at her, stunned by her callousness. My jaw clenched. Tracy's expression didn't waver. She looked straight at her mother, no longer the timid girl who once feared conflict. "She's dead," Tracy said quietly, her voice flat but piercing. "Grandma died the night you were drinking margaritas by the pool." Laura's smirk faltered. She blinked. "She passed away, Mom," Tracy said again, her voice cracking slightly. "And you weren't here. I had to call the ambulance. I held her hand while she died." Laura's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. I leaned forward, my eyes locked onto hers. "You abandoned us, Laura, and you left your daughter to face death and fear alone. You don't get to waltz back in and pretend nothing happened." She looked around the room, suddenly aware of the silence, of the weight pressing down from every corner. "You think I'm just going to let this go?" I continued, voice rising. "No. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Papers are being drawn. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm asking for full custody of Tracy." Laura stood abruptly. "You can't do this. This is still my house." "No," I interrupted. "It was my mother's house before it ever belonged to you. You never respected that. And now you've lost whatever place you thought you had in this family." For a long moment no one moved. Then Laura grabbed her suitcase, muttering under her breath, her face pale and livid. She stormed upstairs without another word. I turned to Tracy. She sat perfectly still, tears forming in her eyes again. I pulled her into my arms. "It's over now," I whispered. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time since my mother passed, I truly believed it. And I felt the blood rush to my head. Tracy squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder to stay calm. "My mother passed away," I said, my voice low but firm, steeled with sorrow and fury. "She died 3 days ago after a heart attack while you were sipping cocktails by the pool in Florida. And you know who called the ambulance? Not me, not you, Tracy did. Our 13-year-old daughter. You left her alone with my dying mother and a note saying to take care of her." Laura blinked, but there was no flicker of remorse. She leaned back in the chair, her smirk returning with cruel precision. "Oh, you're making me sound like the villain," she replied, her tone gliding on sarcasm. "Samuel, I needed time for myself. You know how stressed I've been. And your mother, she was old. Sickness is part of life. I couldn't keep playing nurse forever." She shrugged, as if my mother's death were no more than a missed appointment. I slid her note across the table. Its cold, heartless message sat like a condemnation in front of her. "You wrote this," I said. "You walked out, left Tracy to manage something no child should ever face, and you used our joint account to finance your escape. You think I'd ever forget that?" Laura glanced at the paper, then laughed, a high, sharp sound that made Tracy flinch. "So what now, Samuel? You're going to divorce me? You don't have the money to win. My family has lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast. You're just a civil engineer. You think you can take Tracy from me?" I took a breath, pushing down the fire in my chest. "You're wrong. I'm not just divorcing you. I'm holding you accountable. I have the note, the FaceTime recording, and Tracy's account of what happened. You yelled at my mother for dropping rice, refused to help her with her medication, and abandoned her in a hospital. That's neglect. That's cruelty. You don't deserve to be her mother, and you're no longer part of this family." Laura's lips parted, but before she could speak, Tracy stood up. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her voice trembling but unwavering. "Mom, you're wrong. Grandma wasn't a burden. She loved me. She loved Dad, and she always thought of us. She left us $1 million, her life insurance. You don't get any of it. She knew you didn't deserve it." Tears glistened in Tracy's eyes, but she didn't blink them away. "You left me alone when Grandma needed us most. I'll never forgive you for that." Laura froze. The blood drained from her face. $1 million, she whispered, her voice suddenly desperate. "No, that's impossible. Your family was dirt poor. Samuel, this is a lie. You're making this up, right?" I stood, reached for the worn yellow envelope from the wooden box and placed it on the table. "This is her policy. She bought it long ago, when she and my father were still alive. She wanted to make sure Tracy and I would be safe from people like you." Laura flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning frantically, and then something shifted. Her bravado cracked. She stepped forward, her voice softening, suddenly dripping with false sweetness. "Samuel, please. I was wrong. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. We can fix this. We're a family. Please, give me a second chance." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "No," I said. "You had your chance. When my mother needed you, when Tracy needed you, and you chose yourself. I'm protecting my daughter now and my mother's memory. The lawyer has already been contacted. The divorce is happening." For a moment the house fell silent. Then Laura's face twisted, her sweetness vanished, replaced by fury. She pointed at the door, her voice rising. "Get out. Both of you, get out of my house. You think you can threaten me with lawyers? You'll regret this." She turned to Tracy, her voice venomous. "And you'll regret turning your back on your mother." Tracy stood her ground. She didn't flinch. Her voice was low but strong. "I don't need you. I have Dad, and I have Grandma in my heart." Laura faltered, her mouth hanging open, speechless for the first time. She stormed upstairs without another word. The master bedroom door slammed shut, and the house grew still again. Tracy and I stood there, surrounded by silence and the echo of a past we were finally shedding. In the days after my mother's funeral, we had quietly packed only what mattered: family photos, the recipe notebook, the lavender-scented clothes, the old wooden box. Now it was time. I looked at Tracy, her face still young but her eyes carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. "Let's go, sweetheart," I said, resting my hand on her shoulder. She nodded, hugging her grandmother's green sweater close to her chest. We drove to my mother's old house, the one tucked away in the suburbs where my childhood had unfolded with laughter, warm cookies, and love, a place where healing could begin. As we drove, the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a golden hue over the Michigan landscape. Tracy leaned her head against the window, the green sweater still clutched to her chest. Her eyes followed the fields and trees as we passed, but her expression was unreadable. A mix of sorrow, strength, and something new, resilience. I glanced at her, wondering how she had grown up so fast. In just a few weeks, she had endured more than some do in a lifetime. She had held her grandmother's hand through death, faced betrayal by her own mother, and still stood tall. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "You did good, kiddo," I said softly. "Grandma would be proud of you." Tracy looked at me, her lips trembling into a faint smile. I just wanted to make her happy. She was the only one who really listened to me. "She listened," I nodded. "And she loved you with all her heart. That kind of love doesn't disappear." We arrived at the old house just as twilight began to settle. It was smaller than our two-story place, but it stood firm, wrapped in familiarity and comfort. I unlocked the front door, and we stepped inside. Everything was just as I remembered: the creak of the wooden floor, the faint scent of old books, and the worn-out armchair by the fireplace where my father used to read the paper. I inhaled deeply, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. Tracy wandered into the kitchen, her fingers running across the faded countertops. "Can we bake cookies here?" she asked, almost shyly. "Of course," I smiled. "We'll keep Grandma's recipes alive." That night we unpacked slowly. We placed framed photos on the mantel, arranged the recipe notebook on the shelf above the stove, and set my mother's shawl over the back of the couch. The house was no longer just a memory, it was a fresh start. And though we had lost something irreplaceable, we had also found something else: peace, purpose, and each other. The small house with its faded tile roof and rickety wooden fence wasn't nearly as grand or polished as the one Laura had inherited from her family. But to me, it was something far more important. It was my mother's home. The moment I turned the key and pushed open the door, a wave of musty air and dust greeted me, like the breath of time itself. Months of silence and neglect had cloaked the space in stillness. Cobwebs adorned corners like forgotten lace. Dust blanketed the once-loved furniture, and the scent of damp wood crept up from the aging floorboards. It wasn't just a house. It was a relic of love and memory, and I was determined to breathe life back into it. For Tracy and me. Tracy stepped inside quietly, still clutching the soft green sweater that had belonged to her grandmother. She gently laid it across the familiar armchair, now cloaked in a thin coat of dust. Her wide brown eyes swept the room, sparkling with wonder but also glistening with the ache of absence. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma would be happy to see us here, right?" I nodded slowly, my throat tightening, tears brimming without shame. "Yes, sweetheart. She'd be overjoyed. And we're going to make this house beautiful again. Just like she did." I pulled Tracy into a hug, feeling the rise and fall of her breath, no longer fast with fear, but full of anticipation and the quiet relief of a new beginning. That very afternoon we began the long overdue work. I flung open every window, allowing sunlight and crisp autumn air to rush in and sweep away the lingering shadows. Tracy grabbed a broom almost instinctively and started to sweep, humming one of the lullabies my mother had often sung to her. I set to work wiping down the dining table, where my mother had written out her cookie recipes with a shaky but loving hand, my own hands lingering on the surface, as if touching a piece of her spirit. As we moved through the house, we unearthed remnants of her quiet legacy, a small ceramic vase she always kept by the window, a silver-framed photo of our family during a summer picnic, and a half-burned candle that still carried the faint scent of lavender. Each object was like a whispered reminder that although she was no longer physically with us, her love saturated every corner of this place. As the sun dipped beneath the trees, casting golden light through the freshly cleaned windows, we turned our attention to small repairs. I changed a flickering bulb in the hallway and fixed the kitchen door that creaked like a ghost with every opening. Tracy, meticulous and cheerful, cleaned the window panes until they shone. "Dad," she asked, peering out into the overgrown garden, "can we plant flowers again?" I smiled, my heart swelling. "Of course. We'll start with lavender, just like Grandma loved." That night we curled up in the armchair, her wrapped in the green sweater that still held traces of my mother's scent. Together, we opened the recipe notebook, now a precious family heirloom. We laughed at the memory of Tracy's first cookie attempt, the burnt bottoms, the sticky fingers. That laughter filled the room with something new. Hope. Laura could have the mansion, the polished countertops, the sterile luxury. What my mother had left us was far richer. Love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. 3 months passed. I finalized the divorce. Laura got the house, as she so desperately wanted. I got what mattered, full custody of Tracy. That was the plan all along. I used a portion of the $1 million life insurance policy my mother had left to breathe new life into her house, not to turn it into something extravagant, but to make it truly ours. We replaced the broken roof tiles, ensuring no more winter leaks. We installed a proper heating system that filled the house with gentle warmth on cold nights. My mother's modest bedroom became a small library, with shelves carved from local wood and filled with her cherished books. In Tracy's room, we painted the walls a soft shade of green, Grandma's favorite color, and above her bed hung a framed photo of my mother in her youth, beaming beside my father under a sunlit sky. A significant portion of the money went into a college fund for Tracy. I wanted to give her the chance to chase her dreams, no matter how far they took her. "I'll study hard, Dad," she said one evening as we shared dinner in our now cozy kitchen. "I want to make Grandma proud." I reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You already have, sweetheart. And you've made me proud too." I also set aside a portion of the money for something deeply personal. I reached out to an organization dedicated to supporting elderly individuals with heart conditions, a silent tribute to my mother. I told them her story, a quiet but powerful woman who lived for her family, who gave everything, even in her final days. They listened, moved by the depth of her love. It comforted me to know that through that gift my mother's compassion would ripple outward, touching the lives of others she would never meet. Life for Tracy and me wasn't perfect. We still had our moments of grief, unexpected triggers that brought tears. But our days were filled with genuine laughter, warmth, and above all, purpose. We baked cookies often, using Grandma's exact measurements. Sometimes the batches were too soft or too crunchy, but we didn't mind. We smeared flour on our noses, licked the spoons, and laughed just as freely as we used to when she was with us. The smell of sugar and butter in the kitchen felt like a silent blessing. Tracy thrived. She wore her grandmother's green sweater on chilly mornings like armor, soft and worn but full of strength. She made friends, told me stories about her day, and shared her secret hopes and fears. She talked about becoming a writer, not just for herself, but to share Grandma's story with the world. "She was the bravest person I've ever known," Tracy said one night as we sat watching the stars. And I too found a new rhythm in my life. I continued working in civil engineering, but with a deeper understanding of what it meant to build, not just physical structures, but a life, a future, a foundation of love, honesty, and resilience. Each project I took on became a symbol of that transformation. In the weeks that followed, we continued restoring the house, room by room, memory by memory. I rewired old sockets, fixed plumbing that had rusted with age, and patched cracks in the ceiling. Tracy helped paint the walls, often with her music playing softly in the background. The house, once dormant and grieving, started to come alive again, filled with warmth and laughter. On weekends, we would visit the local market to pick out fresh herbs and flowers. Tracy chose vibrant blooms, daisies, marigolds, and of course, lavender. She planted them with great care in the front yard, speaking to them softly as if they could hear her, and perhaps in some way, they did. The garden began to bloom again, slowly but surely, reclaiming the joy it had once known. We also began a new tradition, Sunday story nights. After dinner, Tracy and I would curl up in the living room with tea, and she would read from the notebook she had begun to write, pages filled with stories about her grandmother. Funny ones, heartfelt ones, some made up but inspired by the woman who meant the world to her. I would listen, often moved to tears, and offer gentle feedback when she asked. At school, Tracy flourished. Her teachers called to tell me she had become more engaged, more confident. She joined the literature club and even submitted a short story for the school paper. Her joy became my joy. Every little achievement she celebrated, I celebrated too, always thinking of how proud my mother would be. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves danced in the wind outside our cozy home, Tracy sat beside me holding a cup of cocoa. "Dad," she said, looking at the picture of her grandmother above the mantel. "Do you think Grandma sees us?" I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "Yes, I do," I said, "and I think she's smiling." The grief of losing my mother never fully left, but it softened. It became a gentle ache wrapped in love, not a sharp wound. Life with Tracy became a journey not of forgetting, but of remembering better. Each laugh we shared, each meal we cooked, was a continuation of the love my mother had given so freely. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were living, purposefully, gratefully, and with deep appreciation for the roots that held us strong. I began keeping a journal, pouring into its pages the memories that lived in my heart. Moments with my mother, the quiet strength of my father, and the countless days Tracy and I spent mending ourselves, piece by piece. It became a sanctuary of ink and reflection, a place where grief softened into gratitude. On many evenings I would find myself curled up in my mother's old armchair, the familiar creak beneath me like a whisper of the past. I'd open her worn recipe notebook, the corners frayed from love and use, and as I read her careful handwriting, it felt as though she were still there beside me, guiding me, reminding me that true family isn't bound by perfection, but by the quiet, enduring force of unconditional love. Lauren never reached out again, and I never felt the need to. One gentle spring morning, as our garden came alive, the lavender finally bloomed. The rich purple blossoms swayed with the breeze, filling the air with the sweet, calming scent that always reminded us of her. Tracy and I stood side by side, watching the flowers dance in the morning sun. She slipped her hand into mine, her eyes glowing with warmth and certainty. "Dad," she whispered, her voice soft as the wind, "I think Grandma's watching us." I looked at her, then out at the garden, breathing in deeply, the fragrance wrapping around us like an embrace. "I think so too, sweetheart," I replied. And we stayed there, under that golden sky, knowing that through every season of life, we would carry her with us, always close, always in our hearts.